Hello and welcome to the Death Chicks. I'm Misty Lynn and I'm here with my wonderful co-host Patty Burgess. And we're here today as part of our Afterlife series. We talk about all things death, dying, grief, and loss. Most people, we've come to understand, fear death because they fear loss, but they also, there's a big question mark about what happens on the other side. And that's why we're doing this Afterlife series. We want people to become okay with this. And the guests that we have on this series are mediums and people who've had experiences with the other side that are gifts that most of us aren't privileged to. So today we have someone with us that's had a near-death experience, and I'll hand it over to Patty, who will introduce our guest, Catherine Holland.
Sounds great, Misty. Thanks so much. Welcome, everybody. You know, what's striking about Catherine Holland when you get to hear her is that you know when she speaks that she has been there, wherever that ethereal there is. She's got a quiet demeanor, but she oozes this wisdom, and I think we all want that, but we don't want to die to get there, at least right now. You know, her wisdom came the hard way, and that was as a result of really unspeakable pain from an accident that she endured from a hit-and-run driver who ran into her while she was on her motorcycle. And she talks about the pain was really, really great, but it pales in comparisons to the gifts that came as a result. And I think you'll see when you talk to her that she has no need to convince the listener of her story. It really doesn't matter whether one believes or doesn't believe. But when you experience her voice, you'll see, as we were talking about earlier in the show, her experience just is. And you can feel that peace and the presence that perhaps it seemed to be installed while on her amazing journey. She wrote a book about her experience called Indestructible Soul, How I Decided Not to Die. And with that, we're going to welcome you, Catherine Holland. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Patty. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for asking.
Sure, wonderful. Well, glad to have you. You know, these near-death experiences, very kind of interesting and maybe up now, even more in popular culture now. But certainly when you were experiencing it, wasn't so much pop culture. This was 100% happening to you. And just to give some background and context to our viewers, can you share a little bit about what happened, what was going on that day? Take us back to that moment and what happened so that we can kind of go on this journey with you and then get the goodie that you got at the end as well.
Okay. Yeah, looking at the rest of the day, it's not the bit I focused on. I must have gone to work that day, but in the evening I often went climbing. And because I was learning to ride a motorbike, I'd been riding for 3 weeks, and I'd done my CBT, which is, I can't remember what it stands for, it's compulsory basic training, that's it. And I was a bit nervous. I was just learning how to handle it, and I'd never ridden a motorbike before taking this test, so I had to learn how to change gear. And there's no reverse on a motorbike, so when you park it, you've got to make sure that if you go in front wheel first, that it's on a slope backwards so you can get out again. So you're thinking about all of these things. And I went into Birmingham, which is about 7 miles from where I live. And I went to the climbing centre, and I went climbing for a couple of hours with my friends, which I did twice a week. And then that evening I also went dancing as well. I went to meet up with my friend in a pub which had live bands, and one of my favourite bands was playing, the band of Rack and Ruin, and I was dancing to lots of these lovely Irish tunes, and they played one of my favourites, The County Down. And so I got on my little motorbike and I rode back to my house. Except I didn't quite get there, about a quarter of a mile from my house. I was going over the brow of a hill, and I could see this long line of traffic, and it was 10:30, but it was in the middle of the summer. It was about midsummer's day, so it was still pretty light here, but people did have their lights on, the cars, and I could see all the red tail lights in front of me down the hill, and I could see this car waiting at side turning. And obviously my intuition knew that there was something funny about that car. But my experience on a motorbike wasn't great enough to realise just how important that car was going to be, because as I drew alongside it, it drew straight out into me as though I wasn't there. I found out afterwards that the man was very drunk, and I guess in his drunk vision he thought he could get through the gap between me and the car, but there wasn't a gap anyway. So I ended up there, and the first thing I knew was I just saw through my visor. I had my full-faced helmet on, just saw through the corner of my visor as the car bumper hit my leg. So it was too late for me to do anything at all. I was just thrown up in the air, and then I crashed to the ground, and my bike crashed to the ground, and then I was just aware of this huge pain. And the pain was so great, I didn't know where it was coming from. I didn't know which part of my body it was coming from. It was all consuming. And I wasn't really aware that I was bleeding to death very fast. I was aware that this blonde woman came and looked at me and said, "Oh, you're all right," and went and got back into the car. But I think what happened was that the passers-by, obviously somebody had phoned the police, somebody had phoned for help, and they also, I think, stopped them from driving away, because she was the wife, she wasn't the driver, she was the passenger, and she'd got out and come over to me, and obviously she was so drunk. I was pumping blood out so fast, I lost half my blood in a couple of minutes.
Oh my gosh.
She must have been very drunk to think that I was all right.
I would say so.
I had my eyes closed, and I was so angry that I opened my eyes just for a moment and saw her and said, "No, I'm not." I was so angry. And I think perhaps that helped too. I think anger's a really positive thing. And then at some point soon after that, I disappeared for a while. And then the next thing was the policeman standing there and asking me my name and where I'd been and what I'd had to drink. And I remember saying a pint of water, because that's what I drank. And he asked me my address, and the police went off to try and wake up my teenage children to tell them I'd had an accident. And an ambulance arrived, and they put a tourniquet on my leg. And I remember thinking, I didn't think they used tourniquets anymore. And when I read up about it afterwards, because I'm nosy and I read all sorts of stuff afterwards, it said, of course, if you're in danger of dying imminently, they put a tourniquet on your leg. Of course they do. And the reason they don't use them anymore is because they increase the risk of amputation. But as far as the ambulance crew were concerned, saving my life was more important at that point than worrying whether I was going to keep my leg.
Do you know how many minutes went by? I'm just curious about some of these details, because when you talk about where you went, do you have a sense of time frame of any of this?
No, I don't really know, and I've got no way of knowing except that the police regularly patrol the area. They, of course, knew better than I did how many people come out of the pub drunk. Not something I'm aware of, because I'm not a drinker, so I don't drink alcohol. Well, hardly ever. So and I don't frequent pubs. So I guess they were probably just up the road. I think they probably came upon it when they realised that there was a problem. The ambulance station is about 3 minutes away as well. So all of this was in my favour. And I don't know how long I went for. I don't know how long I went. I'm presuming it was when I must have been after a couple of minutes when my blood pressure dropped a lot. I also read afterwards that if your blood pressure drops really, really quickly, your body recognises that there's a leak and your artery's shut. So that would be another thing. I suppose my body must have recognised that the big leak was in my leg, and so my arteries in my leg must have closed.
Right.
But in that time that I was away, which of course has become a very interesting episode, I was aware of everything that happened, and I don't think it can have been very long. I do know I was connecting my breath all the while that I was conscious, and I do know that there's nothing that actually happened that I wasn't aware of. So I'm guessing that my time out of my body must have been fairly brief. And the distance I travelled on the journey, if you can measure it in distance,
Sure.
wasn't very far. Because I've read about near-death experiences where people have gone a lot further than I did before they decide to come back. Yeah.
Interesting. And Catherine, when would you say that, so you're bleeding on the side of the road, the ambulance comes, you recall them putting a tourniquet on, and then when did you become aware that you had left your body?
It was before that. It was when it was the quiet time. I think probably it was the time between the woman getting out of the car and saying, "Oh, you're all right," and the time the police came, because I asked somebody to hold my hand. And that must have been a passerby. It must have been one of the car drivers, perhaps one of the ones who phoned for help, I don't know. And I never did find out who it was because my eyes were closed for all of that time. And I asked someone to hold my hand because I didn't want to die on my own. So somebody held my hand, don't know who it was, thank you very much to whoever it was. And I think that's the point when I went for a while, I rose away from my body. The thing that I noticed most of all was that the pain disappeared. That was the real clinch for me that I wasn't there anymore. And I was up and slightly back from my body, but I was sort of facing upwards. You know, they say there's a tunnel.
Did you see a tunnel?
I did see the tunnel, but I didn't go very far down it. As I was going down the tunnel, I had a question. And it was as though I could hear the question, but I think it was my voice. And it said, do you want to continue where there's no pain, or do you want to go back and see your children grow up? And implicit in that were two things. Implicit in, do you want to continue where there's no pain, it was absolutely wonderful. It was really inviting, it was really beautiful, it was really a lovely experience. So that's one of my main messages to people, is that dying is absolutely wonderful. It's really, really nothing to be frightened of. But the other thing was, implicit in, do you want to go back and see your children grow up, was, it's going to be horrendous.
What a choice when you think about that. And obviously the draw to your children is what brought you back, but did you find yourself hesitating there, kind of like, wow, you know, like kind of thinking it through, like my kids will be okay, but I don't know if I want this pain, so let me continue? Or was it more of an instantaneous boom?
It was instantaneous. As soon as I realized that I had the opportunity to go back, which was an odd thing to realize that it was a choice. As soon as I realized I had that choice, I went back, knowing full well that it was, not only was it going to be horrible, because I didn't know where the pain was coming from, I was afraid it was coming from my back, and I would be paralyzed, because you know, those are the things that always hit the headlines. So I was sort of relieved when I realized that it was my leg that was hanging off. They had to practically take my foot separately. I mean, it was.
What were the extent of your injuries there? What happened that created this pain? What did you find out?
It's called a degloving, and the motorcyclists call it a T-boning. So if you imagine the T-bone, the car drives into your leg, and your leg crumples.
Okay.
So my leg was shattered against the bike, and there was a lot of white powder on the inside of my leather trousers. I think it was probably burned skin from the engine heat.
Wow.
My leg, the piece about, I don't know how well you can see, a piece about this size was missing from my tibia. So it just cut through. I guess the bumper just cut through my leg.
Now that's not something they ever found to be able to replace, or?
Yeah, it was in complete smithereens.
Oh.
And during the orthopedic operation, the surgeon actually picked all the little pieces of bone out of the wound and put them in the gap. And then he screwed a metal bar to keep the two parts of the bone at the right distance, so that my body would reabsorb the bone fragments and create a normal bone again, which it did. And then, so my fibula was broken in at least 2 places, 3 places, because it was broken down the bottom as well, which they didn't realise until a couple of weeks later. But it had already mended by then. So yeah, I had all the bones smashed up, but also the problem was, if you imagine a de-gloving, can you see me? Your skin and your muscles all get ripped off the bone. So the skin was all pulled off and the muscles were all pulled back, a bit like pushing your jumper up.
Oh my gosh! And that was all within your pants. Your pants were kind of holding your leg together. Is that true?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. So just above my boot and below my knee was where the car did the damage. So it was the thinnest layer of the trousers I was wearing. They were not proper official, racing motorcycle trousers. I'd only just learned to ride. So, I mean, I'm glad that I'd gone to the lengths to get some leather trousers and a leather biker jacket, and I was wearing leather boots. So at least I had the best chance, because they did say that I wouldn't have kept my leg if I hadn't been wearing those trousers. And I went into the operating theatre the next day. Mr. Goswami came to visit me, a surgeon, and he said, "I'll save your leg if I can. I may have to cut it off below the knee." And I just said, "You've got to. I'm a climber and a dancer and a cyclist," and burst into tears. And I think that really helped him to make a decision, because he spent 6 hours picking little bits of bone out of the wound and putting them in the space. Wow. And then the next day I had another long operation where Mr. Sahari took each of the muscles and reattached all the tendons. He said that almost every muscle had been severed, and he reattached them all. And then he took a big piece of skin off my other leg and skin grafted it on.
Oh my
so then
gosh.
I had 2 bandaged legs.
Well, at least you had them, right? So they say. I guess that was what your biggest concern was, that you had them. And what an amazing thing to tell this doctor who didn't know you.
Yes.
At the last minute, to say, "You've got to, because these are the things I love."
I know, and I think that really helped him with focusing on it, because, I mean, the stories afterwards, it was such fun. I think about 32 people had been in and out of that operating theatre during the time I was in there. Because every member of staff who'd come to see me, they'd say, "Oh, you're the one who Mr. Goswami was operating on. Oh, yeah, we were in there. He was asking us what we should do. He was asking us whether we thought this was going to work. Should we do this? Should he do this?"
Wow. Wow. So you really did have quite a team. So,
yeah.
So when you were gone, or as you came back, and I don't know when, this wisdom, this teaching, this lesson, what would you say, what was your takeaway? What did you learn from all of this? One, as you shared with us, that death is nothing to fear, and that's comforting. That's comforting. I think people fear the dying part. I think people feel the accident part that you had.
Yes.
They fear that.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Well, there are a few things, and I'm learning more all the time. It's quite interesting. But another one that's really, really strong is that we don't go anywhere.
Tell us
about. So when I talk about the traveling thing, it's within the space that we're in now, but on a different plane.
Wow, it's so interesting you say that, because when people I've talked to from an out-of-body perspective, we use that as the kind of metaphor to really get our heads around it, but they really share that it's going within, and it's right here, just different levels of consciousness that or different realms we're not aware of. So interesting.
So the way that I see it is that our spirit, or our soul, it resides near us, but it doesn't hold exactly the space. So we know that our aura, for example, stretches out about 9 feet, and I have a feeling that there is a sort of central anchoring point that's within our physical body pretty much most of the time. But along the breath work, because I've been doing breath work for 15 years when I had the accident, it's not the first time that I'd had that sort of experience.
Okay.
So previously, I'd had experiences which, one of them certainly was like a death experience, and it may have been an echo of another lifetime. I don't quite know how that works, but I certainly came around sharpish with that very strong feeling that I'd been not shaken, I can't think of the word. A bit like when you step off a curb or you're in a dream and you step off a curb and there isn't a curb.
Right.
That sort of
Yes,
feeling
that feeling.
jolting.
Yes.
Yeah. And also I've had experiences of traveling spiritually while my body's been lying on the bed, those sorts of things. And some breathwork sessions can last a long time. I mean, when I was training in all my early years, they would last about an hour, which is fairly standard. But I've had some in moments where I've needed a lot of help that they've lasted sort of 2 hours or so, a long time. And during that time, you go, well, what we call deep subconscious, I don't know what you might call it, but it's time that you don't remember in a linear way. So when I had these experiences during and after this time, it wasn't unfamiliar, and I think that really helped me.
Right, because you had been doing some work. So in a sense, for me, the takeaway from that is that there is preparation for death if we choose it.
Yes.
Many people most people tend to shy away from even talking about it, let alone preparation. And the more I talk with folks like you who've had experiences, some of other teachers out there that talk about this, that it's almost kind of required learning. I guess the kind of like Course in Miracles says, this is required learning. The time you take it is up to you,
Yes.
and how it's going to be for you, because why not put us in a position? I know we talk about preparing for death, let's say, in ways where we can do advanced directives, we can get our healthcare proxies and all of that kind of thing in order, but preparing for the actual death, there's something very delicious about that, so that it's not a shock, so that we're not somewhere that's unfamiliar. And you're kind of embodying that or sharing that with us now.
Yeah, definitely, because I've read, I don't know if you're familiar with Neil Donald Walsh and Conversations with God.
Absolutely.
And I very much enjoyed that first book because it agreed with me.
Don't we love anything that
Always
agrees
my
with us?
favourite books.
I know, I love him too.
And then I came upon his book Home with God about 4 years ago now. It was on the end of a bookshelf as I walked in somewhere. And I thought, oh gosh, I've got to read that. And it's the word home. The reason I'm telling you is the word home. What we don't realise, and a lot of my work is to do with birth, you probably realise with a word like rebirthing, we are only going back to the place we came from. Where do you think we were before we were born, before we were conceived? It's the same territory. It is familiar. We are constantly going in and out of physical life, and if you close time down a bit, it's I was thinking the other day how to describe it. It's a bit like the fairy lights on a Christmas tree. You know, each bulb is a lifetime on Earth, is a physical lifetime, but the link between us is there. The link between us and ourselves and whoever we have been and going to be is there, and also the power line that carries our spirit throughout is the most dominant part of us. This physical experience it's only the tip of something. The spiritual learning that we're gaining, and what I'm doing now with it, which I'm so proud of, is that I'm using it in my everyday life. I'm actually now deliberately using it. That's so wonderful, because that's what we're supposed to do.
So tell us about that. How are you deliberately using this? Can you give us some examples?
Yes, I'm deliberately using it by, somebody asked me this the other day in a very, very straightforward way. What have you done differently is what they said to me. What I've done differently is I've decided to make my spiritual energy the major part of my decision making.
Wow.
So I used to spend a lot of time thinking things through, thinking how I could work through problems, how I could find answers, solutions to problems. And I had to do a bit of shifting of pride, because I thought that the ideas and inspiration I always had were my own. And it dawned on me that they're not mine, they come from somewhere else. Lately, yeah, my pride really took a blow. I'm realizing now that actually it's still my connection to source. I can still claim it as mine. It's okay. But yeah, it's realizing that actually the most efficient way to work is to allow my inspiration to do its job. So I can notice the problem, or I can have the ambition, or I can state what I would like to achieve. And somebody recently suggested you start it with, how can I?
Yes,
So
very good.
how can I attract, or whatever it is I wish to do? And having stated that, that's letting the universe know. And then the best thing I can do is stop trying to think up solutions. It's to wait for them to come in an inspired way, because the universe is so much more efficient. And if I allow the best answer to come, then I don't need to worry whether I thought it up or whose idea it was, or whether my pride needs to worry. I can just say, yes, that's the idea. That's the one I need. Brilliant. I'm good with that. Thank you.
Lovely. Yeah.
That's lovely.
And Catherine, can you tell us how, so thinking about your practice before the accident and after the accident, and your life before and after, how did this near-death experience change you, or what shifts did you notice, and how did that play out in your life afterwards, keeping in mind that maybe viewers and ourselves, we don't need to have this near-death experience to have these shifts into a higher level of consciousness.
No, you really don't need to.
Thank
Definitely
goodness.
a good idea to listen to other people, isn't it? Well, the main thing I learned is not very newsworthy, but it is important, because what I learned was that all of the practices that I'd been using were what saved my life. And that if we follow these straightforward practices, some of them are more difficult to do than others for people, but if we follow them, then we will never be ill. We will be prepared for whatever happens to us. We will always have choices, and we can make decisions. And that was lovely, because I'd been doing it and been perhaps considered a bit eccentric, including by my darling mother, who called me eccentric. And I said, where do you think I got that from? Two eccentric parents, hey ho. But I'd realised that all this healthy living, all this whole food eating, all this water drinking, all this avoiding sugar, and all those things I'd been doing, as well as particularly the breath work, had meant that the cells of my body were so well that they could repair very quickly. And the main reason that I didn't die looking at the textbooks afterwards was because my blood was clean. So I looked at the figures, because I'm curious. I looked at the figures afterwards, and I read, if you lose 5% of your blood, your body can adapt pretty well. If you lose 10 or up to 15, that sort of amount, it affects your major organs. And usually over about 15%, most people will die. And I lost 50%, and I did it in a couple of minutes. So that really shows that my body was, first of all, I was able to breathe at the time and breathe through it. And also, because I kept doing that, I was constantly oxygenating my body and keeping my brain alive, because I don't know, this is just what I read, I don't know how much people know this. When you lose a lot of blood, your kidneys and your liver shut down, because they're not essential for every minute. But if you keep them shut down, they're not cleaning the blood, and the normal breakdown of the body's products and breathing and all of that stuff will poison you. The toxic waste that your body produces with digestion and normal processes will kill you if you have only 50% of your blood. And so I realized, gosh, what I've been doing works. And I was so proud of myself. It was so lovely.
You know, it's so ironic to me that, you know, the kinds of things that you were doing, unwittingly preparing yourself for death.
I know.
Work.
I know.
And in that way, with your breath work and certainly healthy eating and all of that kind of thing, you know, most people, as I say, don't want to spend time there. But if people spend time there, you're a living example that maybe you can save your life in a scenario where you wouldn't want to go because you're fearful of it. So, you know, it's just this odd sort of loop that because you spent some time there, and especially I'm speaking now about the breath work, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that for people who are not familiar. I know we've been mentioning breath as if, like, yes, we all do breathe.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
breath work is something different. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how you think it really corresponds to your...
Yes, and
I'm sorry.
I have to jump in for a minute here
Yes.
because pre-show we were chatting about this, and this is what you do now, Catherine, is breath work. You used to do pain management, and I'd like to hear a bit about that too, but Catherine said something in the pre-show, and she said, well, breathing is very important for your health. And, it really brought a laugh, and I'd like to hear more about that because the deeper dive into it, and even when you were telling your story, you said I breathed through the whole process, and that's not something someone would say. So that tells me that this breathwork practice that you have helps sustain you. So yeah, please share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, just beginning with a tiny thing, the realization that inspiration means breathing in. It also means being connected with the divine creator, source, intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And of course, when a baby first comes into the world, the first thing it does is breathe in. And then the last thing we do is breathe out. And expiration is seen as the end. It's a word that we have in the language, which is quite descriptive, isn't it? But on to your point about the breath work. I learned conscious connected breathing. I learned it to deal with emotional and psychological stuff. I learned it to deal with problems, tackling things in my life. And I found out, having done so, that it also does a whole load of other things, which is intriguing and great fun. But just starting with the practical, Westerners breathe about 50% of the time. So
are we dead the other 50% or what?
You're holding your breath. You're holding your breath.
Okay.
So if we're under any sort of stress that is too much for us to handle, we depress our breathing.
I'm breathing now. I'm trying to...
And the idea that we in our heads, we think that we're breathing in and out, and it's like this, and we just breathe in and we breathe out, breathe in and we breathe out, and it's actually not the case. Usually we're breathing in and holding a breath while we focus on something or worry about something, and then maybe breathing out a bit, and then breathing in, and it's quite staccato, and it's not fluid, and we spend quite a lot of the time with our chest muscles tight. And I'll go into that a bit more in a minute. But the other really interesting statistic is that 70% of the body's waste products are breathed out. Now, if you think of how much, when you go to the loo, when you sweat, or all that stuff, you know, the defecation, urination that we're familiar with, that's only 30% of the waste products of the body. The rest is breathed out. So if we don't breathe well and fully, we are poisoning ourselves chronically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that might explain some of why it is that we have quite a lot of chronic disease. And now I'll move back to why it is that we don't breathe fully. particularly the chest muscles. There are a number of occasions in our early lives. The most important one is our birth, when we first breathe. And depending on the environment under which we're born, which in the Western world is not biologically a very practical and sound environment, we learn to breathe in a state of stress. That may be because there are problems. It may be because the standard practices deplete our mother's oxygen supply to us. So lying down on your back to give birth, for example, is the worst possible position apart from standing on your head.
Wow.
Yeah, because it compresses the blood supply to the baby, because the weight of the womb is on the mother's blood supply, on her aorta. She should be in some sort of upright position, either leaning forward or leaning a little back, but definitely between those two positions, so that the blood can keep flowing to her legs and to the baby, because the blood supply goes into the womb, as we know. And so that's one of the major things that we do wrong. Another thing is that birth is a private occasion. You're supposed to be in a familiar environment with people, or perhaps not with people, that you know in a biological way, thinking about any mammal that gives birth. And the hormones that are responsible for a relaxed birth, mother, baby, family, are hormones that happen when you're making love, when you're in private, when you're in the dim lighting, when you're in a familiar place. So anybody who's had a baby will know that if you move in labour and you go somewhere strange, everything stops. And if you disturb any mammal in labour, the mother will get up and run away, and she'll halt her labour until she's in private again. So we disturb things on lots of levels, and we interfere with the mechanisms. Having had 3 children myself, and having had drug-free births, 2 of them were at home, I know that the baby is the one who's getting out. It's not the mother pushing the baby. The womb goes really tight, and part of that, I believe, is because it makes a good place for the baby to push. 2 of my babies were definitely kicking their way out. They were walking out. I could feel it. So we've got a lot of this topsy-turvy. And the connection with birth and death, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to the same place we come from. It's a transitory thing, is that when we're giving birth, when we're with people we love giving birth, our greatest fear is that somebody will die in the process, because it's a big occasion. And the observation that's been made is that the way that a woman will give birth, the best predictor is her own birth. And we know that we carry that with us. The thing that people don't realise, and I'm honoured to have rebirthed as many men as women, is that men bring their birth stuff too. We've all been born. So although we focus on the future and the mother giving birth, we forget that every man is bringing his birth too. He's bringing his experience, his mother's experience, and that's really important, because he is half the parenting in this situation. And if he's afraid his woman can't lean on him, whether it's physically, metaphorically, or spiritually, he's not available. And that's some of the work that I'm doing now. And it is interesting. I mean, the workshop I'm putting on in May is it's a day of breath, healing our birth, for fertility and birth professionals, because we realise that we're attracted into the business where we've got some personal interest. And somebody did a lovely bit of research to show that most obstetricians had dreadful births. So they're not people you want to give birth around, because they're not holding the space well. Have you heard of Michel Audin? Have not. He did a lot of work with water birth. He's a French surgeon.
Okay.
He became an obstetrician, or he was asked to do a lot of obstetric cesarean sections. So he started asking questions. Why? Surely modern women can give birth. What are we doing? What have we changed? In fact, one of his major pregnancy trainings was singing. He had singing in his post there. antenatal classes, which I think is wonderful. But his observation is that the length of labour is directly proportional to the number of people in the room, or in proportional, if you see what I mean. So yeah, it's those are some of the links of transitions in life and how we approach them. So when people are interested in learning about breathwork, it's because of these things that have happened. And if when we're born we are traumatized as we're learning to breathe, we don't breathe fully because it isn't safe to do so. And then what happens that every time we have stressful situations, we echo that, so we depress our breathing. And it didn't take me long to realize that just at the time when I'm in the most oxygen because I want to work a problem out, or I'm in a difficult situation, it's just the time when I depress my breathing.
Yeah, very
interesting. I should
interesting.
be breathing more fully. Yes.
Very, very interesting.
So I hope that gives you an idea about breathwork. And having practiced it for so long, I came to the point where it's just automatic. As soon as I'm in a crisis situation, I don't have to think about it. My body goes into it. And so lying in the road, my body recognised like that. Emergency, breathe, Catherine, just breathe. And I just carried on breathing. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating, fascinating. Catherine, I do have a question about birth, and when people come into this world and they're clicking along and they don't recognize or have not been told about the circumstances surrounding their birth, does it matter? My sense is we encounter a lot of trauma when we're born into this world, regardless of whether the birth itself was good or not. I mean, there's generally in a hospital setting, there's a sterile environment. There's, if it's a first-time parent, there may be some fear that's palpable. So my sense is that this breath work, though it can be extremely healing for folks who have had a traumatic birth situation, that it's just hugely valuable regardless of what your birth situation is. Am I correct? Or
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, you're right. Yes. When people come for rebirthing breathwork, they often have no idea that it's linked to their birth experience, because they are experiencing relationship problems. They're experiencing trying to think of some good examples. Sometimes they're experiencing an event that keeps coming back to them, and they can't escape it. They're being sometimes it's called post-traumatic stress syndrome. They can't get rid of something that's happened to them in their past. So it might be near drowning, or it might be being in a war situation, or it might be repeated domestic violence problems in relationship, or it can just be a dissatisfaction. It can just be a sense of isolation. When people realize they want to change something, if the idea of breathwork appeals to them, then they turn up, and you know that it's going to be something that they're going to be able to use to work with. I mean, what I really love about it, I have a couple of things I say now. One is I suggest that I'm an emotional midwife. And the other one is that you can rebuild the foundations. So that's a really nice thing to do. I mean, my mother said to me, well, how can you help somebody with something that's happened in the past? I don't understand. And I said, well, it's not what happened that is upsetting people. It's how they feel about what happened. And so if you revisit a situation, a decision that you've made in the presence of somebody, that's why I call myself the midwife. If I'm with you while you do this, like this morning, I had my client who was here this morning, and she had the most extraordinary experience. And people say to me, I know that wouldn't happen if you weren't there. So when we're the little baby and we haven't been able to handle it, because our mother's been out of her depth and she's been upset, and our dad wasn't there, or he was shut out, or whatever happened. And the medical staff were all running around like headless chickens, frightened, because they were worried, because they didn't trust the process, because they'd put one spanner in the works, and then some cascade of stuff happens once you do something like augment the labour, induce the labour, or if you break the waters, or if you do something like that that sets things going and makes the mother's ability to handle the situation impossible because you've pushed her too far too fast, then as the baby, you've got nobody to support you in that moment because they're out of their depth.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So revisiting that type of feeling with somebody who isn't going to be out of their depth is really valuable. And that's where some of my more recent experiences come in handy, because people do come to me when they've got death issues going on. And because I've already handled that and I'm complete with it, I can hold them in that space without fear, which is really useful.
Yeah. I was also going to mention on the other end of the spectrum, I know that breath work has been used with folks who are dying. I know I've at times sat with people to try, and whether they were conscious or not, to sort of synchronize a breathing. Kind of the visual is more like an infinity sign of breath.
That's right, yeah, we use that sometimes.
The infinity sign, yes. So that, and what is remarkable is being able to see kind of a calming effect, at least I've witnessed, of people who were not even so much struggling for breath, just an agitation. Sometimes there is what's called terminal agitation at the end. And that breathing with another person, and I love, you know, here we're talking about midwives. We work with doulas, coaches, guides, end of life. Yeah. What a wonderful gift to share, not only with the person who's dying, but also with the family. I think, you know, when one person in a room can be calm and breathing fully, and I'm going to have to examine that, that can be dispersed to the rest of the crowd. So yes. What wonderful application. Any other applications for those who are dying that you can share with us?
Well, I like your description. We have something called tandem breathing, where you deliberately sit and breathe with somebody. And when I was taught it, it was actually in a group setting when I was training. And you sit with your back to their front. So you sit almost like on somebody's lap, but you're both adults. So you're just resting your back and your lungs on their lungs.
Sort of spooning in a way, yeah.
Yeah, so you can really breathe with them. And that's being with someone. That's the midwife bit, isn't it? You're being with them, and so they're not feeling alone as they're transitioning. And I think that's the key to it. It's the I'm holding your hand. Somebody is with me, and it's the same when you're facing any decision in your life where you feel as though you're out of your depth. So this is where, you know, coaching of all sorts of descriptions comes up, as well as using the breath. Yeah.
And that kind of brings us. Oh, I'm sorry, Misty. I was going to say it kind of brings us full circle, because as you lay there dying, you asked this unknown, unnamed, kind of faceless person to hold your hand as you were breathing.
I did.
And, who knows what effect, but obviously you're here to tell the tale. And really, I know I love the word delicious, and it seems odd to describe a death experience, but what a delicious, juicy tale that is for you to bring back to us who don't want to have that experience but want all the wisdom and the learning.
Yes. Well, I actually have, when I wrote the book, Indestructible Soul, How I Decided Not to Die, afterwards I realized that there was a little sort of guide that I could write that would go with it, and it's called Indestructible Health. So I can offer that to anybody who wants one. It's a PDF, and if you contact me, I will send it to you. It's only about 6 or 7 pages, and it's the things that I realized made the difference. So they made the difference in that experience, but also they made the difference in why it is that I never get ill.
I love that. She doesn't get
Yeah,
ill.
very good.
And
Yeah,
Misty, I'm
well,
sorry I interrupted you before. I think you had a question.
Hmm.
no, I was just going to say what you had said about the hand holding. It's nice that that came back around. It was kind of woven in. But thank you for that offer for the Indestructible Health, and maybe we'll put your contact information in the comment stream so that it can get out to our viewers and a wider audience, because all these little things help, and the healthier we can be on our life journey now leads to a healthy death, and the transitioning over and the soul's journey, and all the wonderful things that we're learning about here on the Afterlife series. I just want to thank you deeply, Catherine. It's been really wonderful to spend this time with you and to hear about your journey. And if there's anything else you want to share, we are coming up to the top of the hour, so please just take time and share before you go. And
Yes, well, as you can tell, I absolutely love this work, and I'm happy to work with people when they have that little glimmer and they think, oh, I could work with her. She could show me this. I've started working on Skype, so I now have people in other parts of the world, which is very exciting. It's just a use of technology that I think is truly wonderful, and I get just the same connection with them as if they're in the room, which is magical. So I'm really happy to offer people a conversation, what I call an inspiration call, with me, where I'll talk to somebody for an hour, and they can decide whether what I have is useful to them, or they can just talk about their own thing, whatever they want to do. It's something that I really like to do. And I feel as though I'm getting mainstream now because I've been asked to talk in the local library, and that feels like a real feather in my cap. Not because it was a big audience, it wasn't, but it was a completely, what's the word, conservative, middle of the road, normal, nothing unusual or alternative about them in the slightest, and they were all ears. They were all ears. So that was really, really nice. Yeah.
That's great how we can see things change like that, going to a library which is as mainstream as it gets, and your topic was invited there. That's very cool. And I wanted to note something else too behind Catherine. If you look back, this is such a metaphoric journey with Catherine. If you look back behind her on the window, when we started out, it was light, and we got to see the whole darkening, going birth through death, life through death, right behind us right behind Catherine on the screen on her window. So take a look at that and notice that as you go through. But the beauty of it is that life's happening even as we're traveling towards death, and probably nobody noticed until the end here. So very interesting.
And the dark bits, we don't have to run from the dark bits. They're just part of it. Using Catherine's analogy, inspire, breathe deeply, take that inhalation, and just live through it and feel it, and there it is, and that's part of life, and that's why we're here, and be feared. It's just all part of it. And when we take things in that perspective, it's just like breathing in and breathing out. We need to breathe out in order to breathe in again. So thanks everyone for being here. And if you haven't yet, please go to Google Plus and follow us there. You can also find us on all social media. I think that's a wrap for today. I'll pass it over to you, Patty, to take us out. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine. It's been a sheer pleasure and a joy. We are quite international. We're in the UK, Canada, USA on this show, so that's always exciting. So tell your friends all over the world to tune into the Death Chicks and have these incredible conversations with folks like Catherine. And remember to go visit Catherine. Catherine, where they can get in touch with you is, tell us.
My website is catherineholland.co.uk.
Okay, great, and there it is. Catherine, thanks again. We're going to sign off for now, and we wish you much joy as you've given us.
Goodbye.
Take care. Bye-bye.